Hi guys, welcome back to another video. I'm Dewald Kirsten, and today I'm going to talk about quite an interesting subject. I'm going to talk about automated HDR, and to be honest with you, I hate automated HDR. I can't even remember what those programs were called that you used to use to merge a bunch of images together, but I always used to say that you might as well swallow up those images, go for a run and puke it out, because that's what it looked like. It looked like the psychedelic drug has taken effect and you didn't know where the hell you were. I've got other videos on my channel, which if you haven't seen it yet, I will put a link for you in there, of how to manually blend your images for HDR. And to be honest, it works perfectly. You've got a natural looking image. It's not these overcooked halos around the edges kind of nonsense that you get. Yes, you can go overboard with those kind of images. Even with a manual blend, you can get those halos, but if you are careful with it, it will look completely natural as the scene that you've seen it. But I think it's about 2 years ago, Lightroom introduced their automated HDR feature built into the app, and I must say, it's getting better and better and better every single time. I use it a lot when I'm shooting interiors now. I've used it for landscape images where I simply knew it was going to be a terrible blending process in Photoshop. It would have taken me a couple of hours to do. I put the images into Lightroom and it just works. It works beautifully. Now, let's talk about that. What is HDR images? HDR is high dynamic range images. Basically, if you're shooting into the sun or with a very bright sunlit sky, basically if you're shooting into direct light, you're going to have either very bright sky and a very dark foreground, or a very washed out foreground and a completely overexposed sky. That means is that the light difference between the two is too much. Now for that, you can put in graduated filters, which I use, and I even shoot brackets with graduated filters. If the dynamic range is just so big that the graduated filters don't bring it down and balance it, I will still shoot a bracket and recover those highlights in the post-processing part. So if you want to go out and shoot HDR, you don't need to have graduated filters. You can do it in camera. Now, one of the main aspects of any type of HDR, be it automated or manual blend, is that with the more info you have, the better your chances of getting a natural exposure. So I would say you need to shoot 5 to 7 brackets per scene. Now, that will give you a whole lot of info over various exposures that you can use for your final blend. Now, if you're going to be doing automated HDR, you can select all those images, and algorithms are going to do their job, and it's going to give you an image of what the computer thinks is the best. Now, that's where the old stuff, 5, 6, 7 years ago, it was just completely horrible. The algorithms was all screwed up. It didn't work. But Adobe did something fantastic with their built-in HDR. It's in Lightroom, and it's in Adobe Camera Raw on your Photoshop as well. So, right, let's go in and have a look at some images. Okay, before we get to that, let's just have a look at where I use a lot of this. Is when you're shooting landscapes, you're shooting in a sunset or sunrise, and you've got, like what I'm going to be showing you as a dark building, for instance, or rocks by the sea with the sun setting behind it, and you just couldn't get that correct exposure in the clouds and stuff. That's when HDR comes into its own. That's where you're going to be using it. Where I use it a lot is when I'm shooting interiors. Now, obviously, it's darker inside a building than what it is outside, unless you need to wait until that beautiful blue hour moment. But often you don't have the time to do that. You are either on a tight schedule. People want to get the images as quick as possible. You don't have another time to shoot. This is the only available time that you can do it. Yes, then you can go ahead and shoot it this way. If you're shooting at blue hour, you can probably shoot it in one single exposure to get the outside light to balance with the inside, so you can still see either a beautiful view or a nice garden area or something from a bedroom or kitchen window, anything like that. That you can do. You can do it in camera in one single image. It's just planning and waiting to get it executed. Then also you've got a very small window, because the light at that time of day changes so quickly that you might end up missing it. So for that, you've got HDR. So we can shoot in bright daytime, we can shoot interiors, and then in post-processing, you blend those images together to give you balanced exposure from inside to outside. And that is something that you need to show people, especially if you're trying to market a house or guest house or a lodge or something like that. You want to give the people the complete experience. If they're standing inside a place, what does it look like outside? And if you're standing outside, what does it look inside again? Because remember, it's dark. Then again, you also shoot a bracketed exposure to have a lighter one, so you can recover those highlights, those shadows that's inside the house. You can bring that out. So if they're standing on the front porch and you want to show them what's in the room next to it, you shoot a bracketed exposure, and those shadows you can recover again in post-processing. Right. So that's where I use HDR most of the times. Before the automated way, I would have used manual blending exclusively. And I still do in most of my landscape images, but since I bought my first set of graduated filters, I don't do a lot of post-processing in HDR images, but every now and again it is still needed, like what I'm going to be showing here. So let's have a look here at what I've got on the computer. Now this was a commission I had for our local shopping mall, and they needed to get some images of the steel structure that was erected outside. Now with this shot I used graduated filters and I bracketed. I shot 5 exposure frames. Now depending on how your camera is set up, mine is set up so it shoots the normal exposure, call it the middle exposure as your camera sees it. So you've got your meter in the middle section, and then it shoots 2 brackets underexposed and 2 brackets overexposed in different increments. So it will underexpose and overexpose by one stop. So it will be normal, 1 under, 2 under, 1 over, 2 over. And that gives you a lot of info. All right, let's show you here quickly. This is the normal middle ground exposure with my filters. There's underexposed number 1. You can see there's no detail in the shadows, but there's beautiful colors in the sky with the sunrise. There's underexposed by 1 stop, a little bit more detail in the shadows, and the sky looks fine here. There is overexposed 1 by 1 stop, and you can see there's really nice detail coming through underneath that roof, and you can see where the graduated filter comes in. It's got a little bit darker there, so the next one is you've recovered those shadows there. Right, so there you go. Those are my 5 bracketed shots for this image that I want to use. Obviously you can see with the completely overexposed one, the sky is completely blown out and it's useless. Now you could go in, just go to the develop module. Right, in develop you could go in and drop the highlights. But as you can see, it's not making a big difference to it. Now also, on the 1 stop under, you could go and increase the shadows, but then you're going to end up introducing quite a bit of noise into those areas. Now with this image, it was shot at ISO 125. There's not a lot of noise in that areas, but still, it is still pretty dark underneath. Right, so let's get in and start blending this image. Now if you would have had to go and do this in Photoshop, you would have had to create selections and mask for those selections and brush those in, and it would have simply taken you a very long time. But in Lightroom, is you select all the images that you want to use, and here again, you don't need to use all 5 or 7 brackets. You can only use 2 or 3 or just 4. If one is completely just way too dark, you just don't use it as part of your the blending process. So it's flexible. You can use 2, 3, 4, 5, or if you've shot 7 brackets, you can use those 7. Right, so you simply right click and you will see there it shows you photo merge, and it'll give you HDR panorama and HDR panorama. Now I'll talk about HDR panorama in a little bit. Right, so let's go in HDR. It will open up your HDR preview window. Now this process could take a little while because it depends on your computer. I'm using an older iMac computer, and these are quite large files because obviously with you're shooting RAW, these are 37 megabit files, 30 megapixel images that it needs to merge now. So your computer will be doing quite a bit of work in the background to get that done. Okay, right, here we go. That is the blended image as Lightroom sees it. Now on the side here, you've got a couple of options. You see you've got auto align, auto settings. Now auto settings is basically Lightroom will add its settings to this image as it feels fit it to do, or how it sees it looking the best. So I normally keep that turned on so you get a good preview of what it could look like, and then obviously afterwards you can go and tweak it as you want. Auto align, what that does is you can shoot handheld panoramic handheld HDR images. Normally with manual blending, it is a mission to line them up in Photoshop. Not really, you select the layers, click align, and it does its thing. But where it doesn't work so nice is if you shoot, especially if you're shooting with longer exposures. You need to have faster shutter speeds when shooting handheld HDR shots, but like for seascapes and all those kind of things, which is obviously not always ideal. You don't get the correct movement in the water or clouds or whatever you want to do. So that makes it difficult to shoot handheld. But if you're doing couple shoot against a bright sky and you want to get all the elements lined up, you can shoot handheld HDR, and Lightroom will align it. It will crop it in to that and align all the right edges to make it fit. Now the next thing, which I'll show you in the next image, is the deghosting amount, and I'll talk about that when we go to the next image when we do that. Right, so that's that. At the bottom it will ask you to merge it, and you just click merge, and you'll see top left hand corner Lightroom will be doing its thing, creating HDR. Now the nice thing about this is the HDR file that's created is a DNG RAW file. You've got all the info of your RAW images on there. You can do all the tweaks. You can normally if you take it into Photoshop and you merge it there, you save it as a TIFF or PSD, which you then bring back into Lightroom, and then you lost all that raw data. It's still a raw uncompressed image, but you don't see what the color temperature or the tint was from when you shot it or how it was. So you need to then, it's all by eye that you need to do it. But when you're doing it with the DNG file, this thing creates is a non-destructive raw-like image. So you've got all your temperature details and everything is in there, which you can then work on, which is fantastic. Right, so you'll see Lightroom is busy finishing it up, and you'll see there is the new file in your film strip. Right, so let's open up. That's you'll see it will add a file name with a HDR DNG. I've already got an HDR like this one in my folder, so that's why it's -2. And then from here you can see in your on your settings the adjustments that Lightroom has made to this image, the way it thinks it should be. Now, to be honest, I think this looks really good. Now, with the sky, you can darken it more and you can brighten it up with your highlights. So you can darken it completely, but this is where you need to be careful with this. This is really magic. but you need to be careful that you don't create that overcooked HDR look. So highlights, I'll bring it up a tad so it looks more natural. You've got the beautiful color in the sky. Shadows is pushed quite a bit, and there, as soon as you push it all the way, you can start getting that HDR type feel. But I will normally just bring that back a little bit for some contrast in it. Same, you can adjust on your whites if you really want to. You can just simply set your white point and your black point, shift, double click it, that's white point, shift, double click, that's black point. So if you look at your histogram, there's no whites clipping and no blacks clipping in that. And then obviously with the rest you can add clarity, texture, DAs, the whole bang shoot that you want. And that's the blended image. And I'm very happy with this as it is. It looks natural, exposure looks controlled, it's not overcooked, you don't have those horrible halos around the edges, and this is what I would deliver to a client 90% of the time. A little bit of tweaks here and there, final sharpens and exports and all those things happen right at the end. Okay, so now we go to the next one that I want to show you. This is an image I shot this weekend, and it was against a very bright sun that was still behind the clouds. I was waiting for sunset, and I was playing around with a couple of shots. Now with this, I had on graduated filters. I had a 3-stop and two stop soft grade filters to darken the sky. As you can see, the exposure was so bright that I still battled with. If I get as close as possible to the balance in the sky, is that my rocks would still be all dark. I would get a good exposure on the water flowing in and out of this little gauntlet that I was shooting. So let's go ahead and we merge this to HDR. So right click, photo merge, HDR. Lightroom will do its thing to create a preview. I've got on auto align, auto settings. This was shot on a tripod, so auto align is just there for safety's sake in case the tripod did move a little bit, which it didn't. But yes. Okay, when it comes to the deghosting, while Lightroom's still busy doing its thing, it will show you at the bottom here a tick box, show deghost overlay. Basically what the deghosting aspect is that you can select parts of the image that has a lot of movement in to be masked out, so it doesn't affect those areas. And obviously in this case we would want the water with all the movement in not to be affected by the HDR process. So if you've got it set to none, it's just going to blend everything in. It's going to blend highlights, shadows, midtones, everything, and obviously all those factors are in the water, so you will end up with this mishmash look in the water itself. So then it's got the 4 different options. It's got none, low, which means it masks out a little bit of that, medium, a little bit more, and obviously high is it will mask out one area completely with the most movement in. So that will be preserved in your image. The one with the best movement in that area will then be preserved for your final shot. Now with a show the ghost overlay, it will show you where that was done, so you can see exactly what is being masked and what is not being masked. Okay, this is there the images now. This was done, I've got my auto settings on. This is just we've merged it from word go. So with no deghosting, you'll see the water in this area looks weird. There's weird elements in the water. Obviously that's the part that was moving, so let's go to low, and we've showed deghosting overlay. Again, with this process you need to be patient because there's lots of work being done in the background to merge these images together. Okay, right, I've had to switch computers because my main iMac didn't like working with those big files, so now I'm on my MacBook. Right, so we've merged those 5 images, and just to quickly show you what the deghost is, you'll see here that I've got it selected to low. So if we zoom in, it looks pretty good. There's one or two odd little things here and there that looks a bit funny in the water. So let's have a look quickly at medium. Let's just show the deghost overlay. So you see everything that's in red is masked out. That is the part of the image that will not be used in the blending. So you see on the medium, it's done a pretty good job in selecting the areas that I don't want to be be part of the merged file. So, and probably the same in high, it's just going to narrow that down a little bit more. It's made it a little bit wider actually. So everything inside that will not be affected. So if you turn this off, you'll see that the water looks different than what it was with medium. See there, medium, and then on low. I prefer the medium one at this stage. Right, so then you go ahead and you click merge, and it will merge your HDR image. Now the nice thing that Lightroom has brought in with the latest update that came through this week is that you can create stacks. So again, you will select these 5 images, you right click on it, you'll say stacking, and you'll see group into stack. So basically you'll see it just narrows down your film strip a lot. So you don't have all those images sitting in a line. So you can go through and you can select the ones that you want to merge into HDRs or panos or whatever, and you simply put them into a stack like that. And then now you can say, you can simply right click on the stack and you say merge to HDR or panorama. So now let's take those 5 images for instance, and you right click and you say stacking, group into stack. There you'll see there's a stack of them. It will show you this little number 5, there's 5 images in that stack. Right click on it and you go ahead. Now you can do exactly the same if you've shot panoramic images and you've bracketed them as well, because then you can create a stack with all those images. But now remember, if you're shooting a pano that's 5 or 10 frames from left to right or right to left or whatever, of 5 exposures each, that will be 25 images. So if you can imagine, just think of how this computer struggled now with the 5 images, especially my old iMac that doesn't like working with those big files, is that if you've got to drop 25 full resolution raw files into it, you need to have some serious processing power to have that image stitched up. So what I normally do is I will stitch each frame, I'll blend each frame's HDR. So if you've got 10 frames, you'll end up with 10 HDR images, and then those 10 images I then stitch together. And you can do that either in Lightroom or you can take it into Photoshop to have it stitched there in its built-in panoramic automating sequence. But I find that the Camera Raw and Lightroom panoramic stitching is so much better than the native one that's always been built into Photoshop. So there we go. That's the HDR function on Lightroom, which it has opened up a lot of doors for me. It has made my life a lot easier, especially when shooting interiors, like I said, and the odd landscape image. Like this one with the water, this one I would be able to blend manually in Photoshop, but it is just quicker if you do a manual, automated blend like this. So if you've guys got any questions or suggestions, please drop them in the comments. Don't forget to click like, subscribe, and all those funny little things that everybody asks for. And hopefully I'll be bringing you more of these videos soon. Right, see you soon.